The scissors snapped, and the classroom fell silent, not out of respect, but fear. 23 neatly parted braids scattered across the linoleum floor like pieces of a broken crown. And for a moment, no one moved. Not the boy holding the shears, not the students recording with shaking hands, and certainly not the woman standing at the front of the class, still, steady, with her back turned to them all. They thought she was just a substitute, another face in a long line of teachers who would come and go, another woman they could test, taunt, humiliate. But what they didn't know, what they never expected, was that she had trained her entire life for moments like this. Her calm wasn't fear, it was calculation. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. And when she finally turned around, everything they thought they knew about her began to unravel. One boy smirked, another laughed. But by the time her foot left the ground, the laughter had stopped. By the time she moved, the bullies didn't laugh anymore. And by the time it was over, the school board was in chaos. The bullies were howling in pain, and the whole internet was watching. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I remember the way the light hit the floor that day. Bright, almost too bright. It made the fallen braids shine like pieces of black glass, scattered beneath a woman who hadn't said a word yet, but who already said everything with her stillness. It wasn't just hair on that floor. It was her pride. Her grandmother's time, her culture. It was every Sunday night twist, every scalp rub, every mirror check before stepping into a world that always looked back too hard. And it was in pieces, because some boys thought it was funny. But that's not even where the story begins. That's just the moment the rest of the world noticed. Her name was Kendra Washington, a new name in a town that didn't like new anything. 32, polished, overqualified, but quiet. Real quiet. She didn't come in swinging a clipboard or demanding attention. No, she walked in like she knew the storm would come eventually. She just didn't feel like rushing it. Some folks in the teacher's lounge whispered she was too reserved, too private. Said she held back. But I don't think she was hiding. I think she was watching, learning, feeling the air in the room before deciding if it was safe to breathe. Magnolia Falls wasn't a place that welcomed difference. It tolerated it on good days. On bad days, it made you pay for it. And Kendra? She was different the second she stepped out of her car that first morning. Pressed blazer, soft locks pulled back tight, eyes like she'd seen something but wasn't gonna say what. I remember thinking she looked too smart for this town, too sharp, like she'd cut herself on the dullness here if she wasn't careful. Now the boys, they were always circling. Trent Bishop, loud and spoiled, thought every room belonged to him the second he walked in. Jake Matthews, second in command, the kind who only barked when Trent barked first. And Kyle Hurst, the shadow, he never said much, just laughed too hard when things got mean. They weren't new to mischief. They were new to consequences. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Why she always wear her hair like that? You see her with that African necklace? Bet she thinks she better than us. And it wasn't always words. Sometimes it was looks. Sometimes it was erasers tossed across the room. Sometimes it was silence when she asked a question, like they'd all agreed to pretend she wasn't there. But the question I couldn't shake: why her? Why so much hate for a woman just trying to teach biology and mind her business? Was it the way she walked? Too confident? The way she taught? Too clear? Too smart? Or maybe it was just that she made them feel something they didn't have words for. Shame, maybe. Maybe respect disguised as resentment. But there was something about her I couldn't place. Like a storm behind her eyes she kept tightly sealed. I started noticing little things. The way she flinched, not from fear but calculation, when someone moved too fast behind her. The way she never turned her back too long. The way she moved around that classroom like she knew the exit before she entered. That's not just something you learn from teaching. That's something you survive to earn. I later found out, quietly, from someone who used to train with her. Kendra held a third-degree black belt in Kyokushin karate. Not that flashy stuff for TV. This was the kind of discipline where you learn how to break bricks with your bare hands and keep your heart steady through fire. She earned it over 15 years. Started when she was a girl in a neighborhood where walking home alone wasn't just risky. It was routine. And her grandfather, a Vietnam vet with hands like tree bark and a stare that could freeze fire, was the one who taught her how to hold her breath and her ground. And she never told a soul, never bragged, never threatened. Because power like that doesn't need to shout. It just waits. So the real question becomes, why would someone like that, someone with so much strength buried under skin and silence, choose to let those boys humiliate her? Why not stop them before it got that far? And here's the part that still guts me. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting them. Protecting the job. Protecting the kids who looked up to her and would have lost their only mirror if she snapped too soon. She waited. She endured. Until that day. Until those scissors. Until the laughter became too loud to ignore. I wonder if they ever thought about what it feels like to have your hair cut off without permission. Not just snipped. Cut. Rough. Violent. In front of eyes that judged, not helped. Would they have done the same if it was their sister? Their mother? And to you watching right now, can you imagine standing in a room full of witnesses and not a single one stopped them? Can you imagine feeling the cold air hit the back of your neck where your hair used to be and knowing no one will feel that for you? What would you have done in her place? Would you have screamed, cried, fought, or stood still and measured every breath so the anger didn't leak out too soon? That's what Kendra did. She didn't break. She didn't run. She turned around, and the look in her eyes wasn't rage. It was release. The kind of release that comes when you've been carrying something heavy for too long and someone finally dares you to drop it. And when she moved, Lord, it wasn't just self-defense. It was years of silence kicking back, years of being underestimated, dismissed and cut down, answering in one fluid strike. It wasn't revenge, it was remembrance. But the real story ain't just in the kick, it's in what came after. What it revealed, what it cost her, and what it forced this whole town to finally confront. Because that classroom? It wasn't just a classroom anymore, it became a courtroom, a battlefield, a mirror. And when the dust settled, the real question wasn't, did she go too far? It was, how many times had she held back before she finally let herself be seen? You still with me? Good. Because this story's only just getting started. I still remember the first time I saw her walk through the gates of Magnolia High. She wasn't in a rush. She didn't strut. She moved like someone who had already survived every room she was about to enter. You could tell from the way she walked that she didn't need anyone's permission to exist. But this town was built on people asking for permission. Magnolia Falls, Alabama. You probably never heard of it unless you drove through it by accident or ended up stuck here on purpose. Population just under 4,000. But the weight of the past? That's heavier than numbers can hold. It's the kind of place where folks still wave politely on front porches but lock their doors when unfamiliar black faces move in next door. Confederate flags still hang on barns like family portraits, and change here? It don't happen gently. It happens with resistance, with side eyes and long pauses, with whispers in the grocery store that never stop when you walk past. So when Kendra Washington moved down from Atlanta, 28 years old, degrees in both biology and education, third-degree black belt in Kyokushin karate, you could feel it. That ripple. That shift in the air that said something different just stepped into this town, and not everyone was ready for it. She didn't come here by mistake, she chose Magnolia Falls. People ask why someone with options would move to a place like this. A place where progress feels like a threat. But see, Kendra always said that the places that need the most light are the ones buried deepest in the dark. And she came to teach. Not just science, but pride, presence, power without a shout. That's what her grandmother raised her on. Those back porch lessons with sweet tea and scripture, where discipline wasn't about control. It was about knowing who you are even when the world tries to make you forget. I saw pictures once. Kendra as a little girl, in her GE, barefoot on dojo mats while her grandfather stood behind her like a statue carved out of principle. Her hands bruised, her posture perfect. She learned pain early, but not to fear it, to understand it, to carry it when needed, and to put it down when she chose. That's the kind of training that don't leave you, even when you step into a school building with outdated textbooks and students who've already decided what kind of teacher you're gonna be. Magnolia High had seen black teachers before, a few, but most didn't stay long. The staff was nearly all white, and even though about 40% of the students were black or Latino, the culture hadn't caught up. It was still controlled by families that had lived there for generations. Families with names carved into school buildings, names that didn't want things to change. The classrooms had old trophies, faded banners, and pictures of winning football teams where every smiling face looked the same. When Kendra entered that first day, wearing a deep blue blouse and a set of braids that reached her waist like a crown inherited, people noticed. But they didn't celebrate her. They measured her. They looked at her like a question they hadn't decided how to answer yet. Students snickered when she walked past. A few rolled their eyes when she corrected them, firmly but without anger. Even some teachers whispered at lunch, said she talked too proper or walked around like she owned the place. They didn't say she was intimidating. They said she was too confident, and we all know what that really means when it's said about a black woman in a position of authority. But she never flinched, never snapped back. She just kept showing up, clear, consistent, calm. Her lessons were sharp, her expectations high, and over time some students started to shift. They listened, asked questions, stayed after class to get extra help. But others? The ones like Trent Bishop, the so-called Prince of Magnolia High, they didn't like that. They were used to power being loud, not quiet. Used to winning without trying, without challenge. And Kendra? She didn't play those games. She held her space without apology. Even when they mocked her voice, even when they mimicked her walk, even when they whispered, "She ain't gonna last past Christmas" in the locker rooms. I watched her smile sometimes, just barely, like she was remembering her grandmother's voice reminding her not to give them what they came for. "You ain't here to prove nothing to them. Just be who I raised you to be." That's the kind of strength that don't come from noise. It comes from knowing your roots go deeper than their ignorance. Still, even strength has limits, and something in the air that semester was different. It wasn't just teasing, it was pressure building. You could feel it, see it in the way students started acting out more, challenging her instructions, recording her when she walked in. Little things, stacking up, death by 1,000 cuts. But she didn't bend. And maybe that's what scared them the most. That she wouldn't break even when they pushed, but nobody could have expected how far they'd go. The day those scissors came out, it wasn't just a prank. It was a statement. A declaration that said, you don't belong here. That your pride, your presence, your dignity, it can be snatched in front of everyone, and no one will stop it. And when those braids hit the ground, it wasn't just about hair. It was about history. About centuries of black women being told they're too much, too proud, too visible. And yet, Kendra didn't move like someone broken. She didn't scream. She didn't fold. She turned, slow and steady, eyes locked on the boy who held her crown like a trophy. And in that moment you could feel the shift. Not in the room, but in her. That's when I knew. They had no idea who they had just challenged. And from that moment forward, nothing in Magnolia Falls would ever be the same again. I don't think folks understand the kind of strength it takes to keep standing when the ground underneath you keeps shifting. Quiet, calculated shifts, meant to knock you off balance just enough to make you stumble. But Kendra? She stood anyway, day after day. And even when it felt like the whole building was tilted against her, she never leaned. That week leading up to the incident, it wasn't just about classroom rules anymore. You could feel the tension like static, always waiting to spark. She had just assigned them a reading packet on the civil rights movement. Simple material, really. But in a town like Magnolia Falls, even truth can feel like confrontation. The pushback was immediate. Students rolling their eyes, slamming chairs. Someone whispered, "Why we gotta learn about that slavery stuff again?" Not loud enough to be caught, but loud enough to be felt. You know, that kind of disrespect that's wrapped in a grin? That's what she was dealing with. It wasn't just ignorance. It was intention. And Trent, Lord, he got bolder. Started calling her Miss Karate Queen loud enough for the whole class to hear. Some laughed, some looked away. And I remember thinking, he wanted a reaction. Not from her, though. From the class. He wanted to be the one who broke her. Prove she wasn't untouchable after all. You could tell he had convinced himself that whatever he did, the school would protect him. That he was above consequences. Maybe he had never been taught different. That Friday morning, the sky looked gray, like something was waiting to fall. Kendra showed up in that maroon blouse she always wore when she wanted to make a statement without speaking a word. Her hair was freshly twisted, hanging low down her back, neat and perfect. She looked like royalty walking into war. You could feel the unease in the room, even before class started. Students shifting in their seats, phones already out, hidden low under the desks. Like they knew something was coming. It was third period, lab day. Everyone was supposed to be focused on mixing solutions. But nobody was looking at their beakers. They were looking at her. She turned to write on the board, back straight, letters neat like always. And then, snip. It was fast. A sound so sharp it cut through more than hair. My stomach dropped. For a second, no one moved. And then I saw them. Those braids, thick and beautiful, dropping like feathers against the linoleum. They didn't fall alone. They fell with every ounce of her patience, her pride, her silence. Trent was holding a pair of silver scissors like they were a sword, grinning like he'd just conquered something. And in his other hand, her hair, held high like a trophy. Phones went up, gasp after gasp. Then his voice, loud, smug, cruel. "Oops, guess that weave got in the way of chemistry." Now I need you to understand what that moment really meant. Because it wasn't just about humiliation. It was about erasure. That act was meant to say, "You don't belong here, and we will strip you down to prove it." Her braids weren't just a style. They were her story, her grandmother's hands, her culture, her defiance. And in that one moment, he tried to take all that from her and laugh about it. But Kendra, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't run out the room. She just turned, slowly. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. And the look on her face, it wasn't rage. It was resolve. Cold, controlled. Like someone who had already done the math, calculated every angle, and knew exactly what to do next. And then Trent stepped forward. I don't know if he thought he'd scare her, or finish what he started, but the second he moved, she did too. Quick as lightning, she shifted her stance, weight on the ball of her foot. Then, before any of us could blink, whap! A spinning heel kick straight to the side of his chest. Trent flew back, desk crashing underneath him, the scissors clattering to the ground. Gasps turned to screams. Jake, the sidekick, tried to charge. Maybe thought he'd play hero, but Kendra didn't flinch. She ducked low, swept his legs clean from under him. He hit the floor hard, wind knocked straight out his lungs. And Kyle, the third one, the one who always laughed but never led, he backed all the way up to the corner, hands shaking, phone still recording, eyes wide like he'd just seen something he couldn't unsee. Chaos erupted, screams, chairs pushed back, phones filming everything. Some kids ran, some just froze. But Kendra? She stood dead center in the room, braids still on the floor, breathing calm, eyes forward, like a storm had passed through her body and left only truth in its wake. And me, I couldn't breathe for a moment. Couldn't think. All I saw was her, not broken, not panicked, just standing, owning. Everything they tried to take, she stood in the middle of it and refused to let it define her. They thought she was soft. She showed them strength. They thought they could control her. She reminded them that power don't always raise its voice. They thought they'd humiliate her. But she took that moment and turned it into something bigger than any of them could understand. And standing there, surrounded by fear and disbelief and phones catching every second, I realized something. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending every black woman who had ever been told to sit down and be quiet. Every girl who was laughed at for her hair. Every teacher who was told she was too proud, too loud, too much. She didn't ask for that moment, but when it came, she met it with every ounce of truth her ancestors left her with. And from that moment on, nothing in that town, or in any of us who witnessed it, was ever the same again. They say silence speaks louder than noise. And that day, when the principal finally stepped in, face pale, voice trembling, it wasn't the shouting that stayed with me. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something undeniable happens. Like the air don't know what to do with itself anymore. The kind of quiet where everything changes, and nobody wants to be the first to speak on it. Kendra didn't argue, didn't fight. She stood there calm, hands folded in front of her like she had just finished a lecture, not a fight. Security came, soft-voiced, unsure of what to say, trying not to meet her eyes. They didn't put her in cuffs, but the way they walked her down the hallway might as well have. Students poked their heads out of classrooms, some whispering, some filming. And still, she didn't look away, didn't lower her gaze. She just walked, steady, quiet, braids still on the floor behind her like fallen metals. That image, I'll never forget it. By lunchtime, it wasn't just a school problem anymore. It was an internet earthquake. Videos had already hit Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, news blogs. I remember scrolling through my feed and seeing the clip again and again. Her braids falling, Trent grinning, the spin kick. Different angles, different captions, same story. The hashtags came next. Braids and balance. Protect black women. Teacher V's terror and the takes. Lord, the takes. One side called her a hero, praised her composure, her restraint, the years she put into being more than the world allowed her to be. They said she represented every black woman who's ever been tested, and every teacher who's been expected to take abuse and still smile. But then came the others. Folks calling her dangerous, unstable, violent. Said she had no business laying hands on those boys no matter what they did. They used words like overreaction, unprofessional, and that old favorite, aggressive. Said her martial arts training made her a weapon, that she should have walked away, as if walking away was still an option when your dignity's already been cut and waved like a flag. The police got involved quick, dropped a statement saying it was under investigation, that no charges had been filed yet, but they were reviewing all footage and collecting witness testimonies. You know the type, carefully worded, afraid to take sides. And the school board? They called an emergency meeting that same night. Behind closed doors, I imagine they were panicking, trying to figure out who to protect, what to say, and how to clean up something that couldn't be swept under a rug. Rumors leaked. Some said a few board members were pushing to fire her on the spot. Others said there was talk of placing the boys on temporary suspension. But nobody knew where the line was anymore, because this wasn't just about school policy now. This was about race, power, history, and that kind of truth don't fit neatly in a handbook. The news picked it up by morning. CNN ran a headline, Alabama teacher responds to assault with martial arts, community divided. Black Twitter? They had Kendra trending by noon, sharing clips of her old college speeches, pulling up posts about her community work, flooding the internet with stories of black teachers who quietly endure and rarely make headlines, until they finally push back. Fox News? Well, they went their usual route. Made her out to be militant, dangerous. Said schools had become war zones. That parents needed to worry about whether their children would come home safe. Not from guns, but from educated black women who refused to be disrespected. It was surreal. Watching the town unravel on TV, on Facebook, in whispers at the grocery store. I heard one lady say, "I knew she was trouble the day she walked in with all that hair." As if pride was proof of guilt. Parents started giving interviews. Some defended her, said their kids respected her more than any other teacher, said they finally saw someone in the classroom who looked like them and demanded more. Others? They said their boys were just joking, that it was harmless, that she took it too far. One mother cried on camera and said, "My son was assaulted in front of everyone and nobody protected him." Nobody asked what it felt like to have your hair ripped from your head in front of students you teach. Nobody asked what it felt like to have to choose between your peace and your paycheck every single day. The town was split right down the middle, lines drawn between justice and comfort, between people who wanted truth and people who just wanted quiet. And in the middle of it all was Kendra, silent, not giving interviews, not clapping back, just waiting. And here's what they didn't know. This wasn't the first time she'd faced a mob. See, back when she was in high school, down in the east side of Atlanta, she had a teacher, a white woman, who used to dock points off her essays for being too passionate. Told her once that her tone made her uncomfortable, that maybe she should consider a less combative writing style. And when Kendra stood up for herself, when she asked why her peers were praised for the same things she was punished for, they sent her to detention, called her defiant, disruptive. So she trained harder, studied more, went quiet, not out of fear, but out of clarity, because she learned then what many of us learned too young. The world don't always punish you for being wrong. Sometimes it punishes you just for being visible. That's why the mob don't scare her, because she's seen them before. Sometimes they wear hoodies and yell slurs. Sometimes they wear ties and speak in policies. But their goal's always the same, to remind you that their comfort matters more than your truth. And still, she stands. You ever felt like the whole world was watching you not to learn, but to judge? To see if you'd crack? That's where Kendra was. Her every move under scrutiny. Her life picked apart, questioned, dissected. And all she did was defend herself. Defend her peace. Defend her body, her history. But they made her the problem. And still, she stood. Now some of y'all listening might be wondering, how would you have handled it? If that was you or your daughter or your mother, watching someone snip your pride with a pair of school scissors, would you have stayed calm? Would you have waited for policy to save you? Or would something in you, deep and ancestral, finally rise up and say, enough is enough? That's what Kendra did. And as the world argued about her, about what's professional, what's acceptable, what's too much, she stayed silent. Because when you know who you are, you don't owe nobody an explanation. But let me tell you something. The next chapter? That's where things really changed. Because what none of them realized was that her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Let me tell you what hurt the most. It wasn't just what happened that day in the classroom, it was what came after, when the truth was out there, but folks still tried to twist it. Still tried to paint her like the problem, like she was unstable, unpredictable, unfit to teach. But that's the thing about truth. It may take its time, but it never stays buried for long. A few weeks after the school board claimed they were reviewing all sides, something surfaced. Something they had tried real hard to keep quiet. Trent Bishop, the golden boy, the loud one, the ringleader. He wasn't new to this. He had been suspended twice before for bullying. Once in 7th grade, once in 9th. Records sealed, swept away. But the details? They weren't small. One incident involved pushing a girl into a locker so hard she had a mild concussion. Another time he was caught texting racial slurs to a biracial classmate during math class. But every time he got to walk away clean. His daddy was head of the local school foundation, rich, loud, white, and well-connected. Folks called him the Bishop of Bishop County, like his name meant something sacred. Turns out it just meant protected. That revelation alone changed the tone of the entire conversation. Suddenly, the narrative started to crack. People who'd been calling Kendra a threat started asking questions. Why wasn't this boy held accountable before? Why were his records wiped while hers were being dissected on live television? And then Kendra's lawyer dropped a bomb. See, what a lot of people didn't realize was that the school had surveillance cameras in that lab. Ones that didn't just catch the incident. They caught the moments before. The boys whispering, Jake pulling out the scissors, Trent passing them back and forth like a joke. Kyle nervously glancing at the door. You could see it. The premeditation, the smirks, the plan. Then the footage showed her, Kendra, calm, focused, writing on the board, not even aware of the chaos brewing behind her. And then you saw the moment her hair was cut. Her body jerked just slightly before she turned. Not fast, not violent, just like someone who realized her patience had finally run out. When that video dropped publicly, it did something. Folks who'd been quiet started speaking up. Black students at Magnolia Falls, ones who never said a word before, began sharing stories. Stories about being followed in the hallway, getting written up for disrespect, while white students got warnings. One girl said her natural hair was called a distraction by her teacher. Another said he got suspended for using the word racism in an essay. And it wasn't just the current students. The alumni came out too, some from 10, 15 years back, sharing stories of being told they were too urban to make it far. One man said he graduated top of his class, but the principal told him not to aim too high for college, said he should consider trade school like his people probably did. It all came pouring out. And suddenly, the town that had been so sure of its own innocence couldn't look away anymore. Then came the Department of Justice. After weeks of national attention and community pressure, they announced they were opening an investigation into racial bias within the Magnolia Falls School District. Civil rights attorneys were called. Old complaints were unsealed. A pattern started to take shape, one too clear to ignore. See, it wasn't just about Kendra anymore. It was about every person who ever had to shrink themselves just to survive. Every teacher who stayed late and showed up early but still had to work twice as hard to be seen as professional. Every student who was told they were angry when they were just exhausted. Every black girl who got written up for rolling her eyes when all she wanted was a little respect. And while the town tried to clean up its image, apologies, diversity statements, new policy promises, it was already too late. The damage had been done. The truth had been told. I remember sitting on my porch late one evening, scrolling through the news. There was a courtroom sketch of Kendra sitting across from the school board, her head high, hands folded, face calm. The same posture she had the day they tried to humiliate her. The same look of quiet defiance. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't broken. She was just steady. And the thing is, the people who tried to bring her down, they thought they were dealing with just one teacher, but they weren't. They were dealing with a whole history, a whole community, a whole generation of people tired of being silenced. Because this wasn't just about hair, it was about dignity. This wasn't just about a kick, it was about survival. This wasn't just about 3 boys in a classroom. It was about a system built to protect them at the expense of someone like her. And when it all came to light, when the truth finally stood taller than the lies, Kendra didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't celebrate like she won something. Because to her, it wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. And after all she went through, after all the names, the whispers, the headlines, the threats, she was finally seen for what she always was. A protector, a fighter, a teacher, a black woman who refused to shrink. And I think the whole world saw that too. You know, sometimes justice don't come in the way you expect. It don't always wear a robe or come with a gavel. Sometimes it shows up quiet, wearing sneakers and grief, standing in front of a room full of people who once doubted your very right to breathe easy. That's how it felt watching the school board release their final statement. No press conference, no cameras, just a single typed document uploaded to their dusty website. It said Trent Bishop and Jake Matthews had been permanently expelled, said their actions violated not only the school's code of conduct, but basic human decency. Funny how quickly people find their conscience when the world is watching. But that wasn't the whole story. The part that got me, the part that stuck in my throat and refused to move, was Kyle Hurst, the quiet one, the one who used to laugh when Trent made jokes, but never said a word to stop it. When the hearings happened, he stepped forward, testified in Kendra's defense, told the room what really happened, said they planned it a week in advance, said he was too scared to stop them, and even more scared to speak up after. But guilt don't let you sleep easy. And maybe that's what finally made him talk. Maybe deep down he realized silence wasn't innocence. Kendra was cleared of all wrongdoing, both by the school and by the district attorney's office. Self-defense, they called it, a measured response to targeted harassment. But still, she never went back. And I understood that. See, healing ain't about proving a point. It's about protecting your peace. About choosing yourself even when the world tells you you're supposed to keep giving. That school didn't deserve her. Not after everything they let happen. Not after the whispers and the side eyes and the cowardice. So she packed her things, left that small Alabama town in the rearview mirror, and drove back to Atlanta with nothing but her name and her pride intact. And that's where the story really began. Because what she did next, that's where the power lives. She used the settlement money, every dime, and opened a place called the Crown Center, tucked between an old barbershop and a rundown library on the east side. You wouldn't even notice it unless you were looking. No neon sign, just a clean glass door and 3 words painted in gold. Fight, learn, rise. Inside it wasn't just about karate. It was about wholeness, about teaching black girls how to protect more than their bodies, how to protect their joy, their voices, their worth. She offered free self-defense classes, mental health workshops, tutoring, a sisterhood, a safe space in a world that rarely gives us one. And they came. Little girls in pink sneakers and box braids, teens with notebooks full of poetry and pain, mothers, survivors, dreamers, they came. One day I visited just to see it for myself. I sat in the back while she taught. She didn't raise her voice still, but every word landed like thunder. There was power in her quiet, in the way she made each girl feel seen, like they mattered, like they didn't have to earn their right to be whole. She didn't talk about what happened in Magnolia Falls, not unless someone asked. And even then, she'd just nod and say, "I learned everything I needed to learn in that classroom," and leave it at that. But the story kept moving. Months later, Netflix came knocking, wanted to tell her story, offered her full creative control, said they didn't want to sensationalize, they wanted to honor. So she sat with them, told them the truth. Not just the viral clip truth, but the long nights, the therapy, the years of being dismissed and underestimated. She told them about her grandmother, about her first dojo, about the little girl inside her who used to flinch when people spoke too loud. And they listened. When the mini-series dropped, it was called Crown. 5 episodes. Raw, beautiful. No villains drawn in crayon, no polished speeches. Just a story about dignity and fight. About what it costs to stand up. About what it takes to still be soft after the world's tried to harden you. And when I watched the final scene, her standing in front of a group of girls, fists raised, eyes focused, I cried. Because she didn't need revenge. She didn't need to scream her pain into the void. She just needed justice and peace. Now I ask you this. What would you have done? If that was your sister, your daughter, your teacher? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have stood like she did? Because the truth is, we all face our own classrooms, our own trends, our own moments when silence feels safer than strength. But maybe next time, we remember her. And maybe next time, we fight back. With grace. With power. With everything they tried to take from us. And we build something better out of it. Something they can't burn down. What would you have done if you were in that classroom? If someone took a piece of your dignity and dropped it on the cold tile floor like trash, while the rest of the room just sat there watching? What would you do if your hair, your culture, your grandmother's prayers braided into each strand was treated like a joke? If the pain you carried got turned into content for someone else's amusement? Would you freeze? Would you fight? Would you walk away and carry the weight alone? See, I still think about that day more than I probably should. I think about the sound them scissors made. How they didn't just cut through hair, they cut through the silence too. I think about the way nobody moved at first, like the whole room forgot how to breathe. And I think about Kendra. How she didn't flinch, didn't scream. How she turned around with the kind of calm that don't come from rage, but from knowing exactly who you are. That moment changed more than just her life. It changed all of ours. Because even though it started in a classroom, it echoed way beyond them walls. It made folks ask themselves hard questions, made people who never spoke up before finally find their voices. Teachers who'd been quiet about the racism they'd seen for years began writing open letters. Parents who thought their kids were just playing around had to face the fact that the children they raised were capable of harm. And students, some of them just 14, 15 years old, started walking into school with their heads held higher, just knowing she existed. Now, this world will try to teach you that staying quiet is safer, that if you just keep your head down, you'll make it through. But the truth is, some storms don't pass until you stand up in them. Some battles don't end until you stop trying to make peace with people who never wanted it in the first place. That's what Kendra showed us. She didn't ask for this fight, but she didn't run from it either. She didn't beg for approval or lower her standards. She stood tall, braids or no braids, and reminded every black girl watching that you don't need permission to defend your peace. You don't need applause to validate your worth. And you sure don't need to shrink to survive. I remember reading a post one of her students wrote not long after everything happened. It said, "She walked in the room like we already mattered. That's why we believed her when she told us we did." That stuck with me. Because at the end of the day, this story ain't just about bullies. It ain't just about a teacher. It's about what it means to carry yourself like you're worthy, even when the world tries to convince you you're not. It's about how we respond when someone crosses a line we never gave them permission to touch. And if you're listening to this, if you made it this far, I want you to really sit with that. What would you have done? If that was your sister standing in front of a class full of phones and mockery, trying to teach while they laughed behind her back? What if it was you? Would you stay silent? Or would you rise? Because justice don't always show up with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet, in how you hold your ground, in how you turn around slow, steady, with nothing but history in your eyes and your ancestors in your fists. For some people, justice comes in a courtroom. For Kendra Washington, it came with a whisper and a roundhouse kick. And maybe that's all it takes sometimes. A moment, a stand, a truth that refuses to sit down. Now let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been laughed at, pushed down, dismissed, just for showing up in your full self? If you have, then you already know this story ain't fiction. You already know this story is yours too. So don't just watch it. Share it. Let someone else see what strength looks like when it's quiet. Let them know silence ain't always peace. And before you go, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next time someone turns pain into power and power into purpose. Because the next story, it might be yours.